Hello, and welcome to the latest in a series of podcasts sponsored by the DC Bar Pro Bono Center. My name is Regina Hopkins. I'm the Assistant Director, and we have today Rick Marks, who's a partner at DLA Piper, as our guest. These podcasts are recorded monthly and co-sponsored by the DC Bar Pro Bono Center, which provides pro bono legal assistance to nonprofit organizations, and the Center for Nonprofit Advancement, which provides technical assistance and support for nonprofits in Southern Maryland, DC, and the Commonwealth of Virginia. The topic today is Tone at the Top, how nonprofit leaders create the right culture in their organizations. And as I said, the person we'll be talking with today is Rick Marks. Rick Marks is a partner at the law firm of DLA Piper, and he is the head of the corporate practice group in DC. Rick obtained his undergraduate degree from Northwestern University and is a graduate of the University of Maryland Law School. He is also the chair of the Pro Bono Committee at the firm's DC office and has served on numerous boards of directors for nonprofit organizations. He is also an adjunct professor of law at Georgetown University. And so, welcome, Rick. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So, anyway, our topic, as I mentioned, is tone at the top. And we've heard that phrase thrown around a lot in the last few years, ever since, I think, the Enron scandal sort of kicked it off. So I wanted to, if you could just take a minute or two to ask, what does tone at the top mean? As I said, it's used a lot, but I'm not sure people have an exact idea of what that implies.
So the tone at the top really is about the culture within the organization to do the right thing. It's a culture of compliance, creating a space where everyone from the board level on down to the newest employee understands the rules and the policies that are intended to allow the company to operate safely, operate in a way that is compliant with law, and in a way that supports its mission. So it really is the concept that the people at the very top of the organization, and we'll get to what that means, but the people at the top of the organization need to create and instill a culture of compliance and encourage that on down so that every person within the organization follows the lead of the people at the top.
Mm-hmm. So as you alluded to, I guess the next question people have is, who is the top? Who's at the top of an organization for purposes of setting the tone?
Yeah, so this is a question that depends on where you sit within the organization. Clearly, the board of directors is at the top of the organization. The executive director or the senior management are at the top of the organization because they clearly have the responsibility and the authority to run the business, run the company. But any manager can be seen as the top of their team. So if you have anyone reporting up to you, you could be seen as someone who's at the top and whose behavior is going to be reviewed and mirrored by the people who work for you. So I know when people talk about it, they might think it's just the board of directors or just the president or executive director. But my view is that it really needs to run down through the organization to anyone who can be seen as managing or leading a group within the company.
Mm-hmm. So if I'm an administrative assistant, my boss is the top of the organization for me, is what you're saying.
Sure, because that person is a direct report, and you will model the behavior that you see. So if your boss is skirting company rules, then chances are you won't take it seriously, even if perhaps people at the top, very top of the board, are expressing strong desire to follow the rules. So it needs to really be through the organization because, again, you can be at the top even if you're not at the very top.
Mm-hmm. So, as you said, it sort of starts with the board, and I guess the question is, how does the board set the tone that's what's supposed to flow throughout the organization? How do they make that sort of spirit alive within the organization?
So there's a couple concepts that they first need to embody, and then we can talk about how you might process it through. But to me, it's important that there's transparency within the organization to show that there's nothing to hide, to show that there are any issues are out in the open and being dealt with. And you may see situations in which organizations might have open secrets. People know somebody's doing something wrong, but everybody kind of ignores that, and that creates tacit approval of those types of activities, which again doesn't lead to the proper tone and culture that you want to espouse. So it's really important, I think, to have transparency through the organization so people can see what's going on. And then to be honest about what's happening in the organization, you might see situations in which management may tell something that's not quite true or may hide certain items. And in certain cases, you do need to manage information. But the idea that you're going to get away with telling something that's a half-truth and not get found out within an organization, if somebody within the organization knows the actual truth, chances are at some point it could come out and really disrupt the organization and its mission. So you want to create trust within the system by being honest and allowing people to have confidence that if they raise something, it's going to be addressed and the company's mission will be protected. And so how do you do that? If you're the board, the first thing you want to do is adopt policies that reflect the concerns that you might have that you need to monitor. So things like harassment issues, things like whistleblowing, these conflicts of interest. These are areas where you want to make sure that you as a board create a policy that will apply to everyone within the organization, including yourselves. And then you need to make sure that those policies are accessible to everyone in the organization so people know what's expected of them. And it would be good if the leaders of the organization are the ones who are pushing forward with that message so that people understand it isn't just a piece of paper that is written down. It actually has meaning and import in the organization. And then you need to worry about implementing those policies. That's another way of kind of how the board can set the tone. So you create the policies and then you have to implement them. Again, you can put them through on your websites. You can hand out the policies in employee handbooks. You can do trainings where you have annual or new employee training and make sure that that applies to everybody, the new director as well as the new secretary. Anybody who joins the organization gets the same training on these policies and issues. And to me, that will help kind of establish the structure by which you can set the proper tone.
Mm. And I guess, and you sort of intimated it, it's the idea that the top people also walk the talk. So if there is a mandatory training, then the executive director should be there, is I think what you're saying, that they, in effect, follow their own policies.
Absolutely. You need to do what you want others to do. A lot of the people who report up to each manager or to the board are going to try to mirror the actions that they see. So if you see someone above you who is following the policies and the rules and is giving heed to the issues and is submitting their expenses on time and doing all the things you want to be done, then chances are the people who report up to that person will do the same. If you see somebody above you who is not following the rules the way that they should, not following the policies the way that they should, particularly if it's this open secret, as I mentioned earlier, people know tacitly somewhere within the organization there's this rumor, there's understanding this person doesn't follow the rules and that nobody within the board or senior management is doing anything about it. That creates a double standard within the organization, and it diminishes the amount of trust within the organization for those policies. Because if I'm a junior person and I see someone who's senior to me who's not following a policy, not only will it perhaps discourage me from following the policy, but it will also discourage me perhaps from reporting up the issue because I don't know how it's going to be received by management when they get my advice. Because again, I'm seeing someone above me who I appreciate and believe that senior management knows what they're doing, and they seem to be saying it's okay. So what am I supposed to do to try to help the organization, even if I intend to follow the policies to the letter?
Yeah, I remember reading the story about when NPR very recently had the sexual harassment scandal. As you said, it was an open secret for years that this particular manager, senior manager, was harassing people. And so the women who were impacted by it felt there was no point in reporting it because everybody knew. So obviously everybody was okay with it. And that's the impact that happens when it's not addressed within an organization.
So clearly, what we've spoken about so far is setting up policies and trying to implement them, which we'll talk a little more about. But once you set up the policies and the structure, if nobody uses it because they don't trust it, because they don't think it's a safe process, they don't believe that anything will be done, then it doesn't do what you want it to do. It doesn't create that tone and that culture that you're looking for within your organization. So there are two sides to this. You need to set up the structures that will allow you to kind of tell the folks within the organization how you want them to act. But then you need to have the compliance side. You need to have something which people think this is a workable solution to deal with problems before they become significant issues for the company.
So I just to talk a little bit about how some of the practices, ongoing practices. I'm a new organization. I set up my policies. I train somebody. Am I done? Is that enough, or what's my ongoing obligation to maintain a tone that I want to establish?
Each organization obviously starts small, generally, and they may grow very large. They may grow organically. They may grow through a merger or an acquisition of some sort. And every time you go through one of those transformations, you need to reevaluate the policies we're talking about, the harassment policies, whistleblower policies, conflict of interest policies, things that are intended to protect the organization. Because a small organization, the risks are different than in a larger organization. As the organization grows and the number of people who are involved, the dollars grow, the risk may change. And so what you need to do, I would suggest, is at least every year, and certainly if you go through one of these transformative events, that you need to bring back and reevaluate your policy, see if they still apply to your organization as it's currently constructed, and make changes if it's grown or if it's changed its mission in any way, just to make sure that what you have in place continues to be applicable to deliver what it's trying to do, which is to create the culture of compliance and make sure the company doesn't get into significant issues and is a good workplace for your employees and a good place where the donors have confidence that things are being run right and their donations are being well spent.
And, I guess the question is in terms of the board, the reporting to the board, the need to put someone in charge, to make sure that this happens. What should people do in terms of, making, because, if it's everybody's responsibility, sometimes it ends up being nobody's responsibility. So
clearly the board has a duty to stay informed about what's happening within the organization. So you set up these policies, and again, now we're turning more to the compliance side. How are we going to make sure that this is working? So the first thing that I think you should do is put somebody in charge. Somebody needs to be accountable for complying with this policy for the entire organization. So you'll set up a structure, put someone in charge. That person should come back regularly to the board and report, make a report as to what happened during that quarter, that half a year, that year, whatever period of time might be appropriate given the size of the organization, so that the board gets active, regular feedback on an opportunity to ask questions about whether there's any harassment issues or the like within the organization. And if you're a board member and you haven't heard about any issues, no one's come to the board to say, I'm reporting on our harassment policy, for example, then you need to ask the question. No news is not always good news. You can't turn a blind eye to what's happening within the organization, and you have a duty to check. So you should set somebody up in charge, have that person come and make reports to the board. And if the board isn't getting the information or the feedback that it thinks is sufficient, it should ask questions and get to the bottom of whatever concerns that they have. So that's how I think structurally you can do it. There's potentially technology advancements that can be used to help the board and senior management If you have expense reporting rules, you could have emails that go out that remind people when they go on a trip to submit their expenses within a period of time in accordance with policy. So I think that you need to be creative about how you help the structure operate efficiently and avoid things that could potentially slip through the cracks. Because when you end up 3 to 5 years down the road with a real problem, where if you would have dealt with the issue in the structure up front, you could have handled it in a much easier way. But then it turns out years later it wasn't dealt with because somehow it slipped through the cracks.
When we were talking about preparing this conversation, I shared an anecdote about one of your colleagues at DLA Piper who said that, you usually find out bad news about the organization when someone's about to get fired or someone's leaving, because at that point they feel they have nothing to lose. So the truth comes out then, whereas you'd much rather it come out earlier, while people are still working and the like. And so the question is, how do you get people to the point of feeling comfortable enough to tell you bad news, that something's going awry, without feeling that they're putting their job at stake in doing so?
Yeah, this is the hard part on the execution side. Like I said, you can set up these wonderful structures, you can adopt policies, you can review them every year. But if people don't feel that the policies are clear, that they're easy to use, and there's a safe mechanism for reporting issues that they see, they're not going to use it. And that's almost as bad as not having the policies at all. So this idea, this kind of fear of retaliation, fear of losing your job, fear that your reporting up will not mean anything, those go back to kind of the transparency, honesty conversation we had earlier. You need to make sure that people feel that, number one, if they see a problem, they understand the mechanism for reporting up that problem. And there needs to be multiple paths for doing so. If my direct supervisor is my only path to reporting misconduct, and that's the person who is committing the misconduct, then I have a broken structure. So you need to make sure your structure is flexible enough to allow people to report up to the board or to whomever they need to, so that the issue gets addressed. Then you need to make sure that people feel that if they do report something up, it'll be dealt with seriously. And again, that tone at the top is really important, because if people feel like the board and the managers above them take these complaints and these reports seriously, then if you like your organization, will make a report because you want to protect the organization that you work for. And then the last big point is obviously the retaliation issue and the fear of retaliation. Nobody's going to use a system if they think they're going to get fired. And so you need to make sure it's very clear that people understand that there won't be any negative reaction to their reporting. That's a hard thing to do sometimes, depending on the circumstance. It's not so easy to communicate to someone everything's going to be fine, you won't be retaliated against, when they have to work in an organization and top management can't necessarily speak for every person in the organization. So again, that's why I think it's important that everyone buys in to this culture and to these policies, so that people do feel that they can report up without retaliation from anyone within the organization, their coworkers or their managers or people in other departments.
And I sometimes think, when I was a general counsel at a nonprofit, it's not just working with the person who is making the accusation, but also working with the person who's being complained about, because, to sort of get them in a place where they don't, if it's, sometimes it's serious enough that they have to be fired, but if it's non-fireable offense, get them to the point where I guess they trust the process too, and that they feel that, that they can put this behind them in some way, so that they can, just that they feel, so that they don't lash out, I guess is how I'm saying, and get very defensive about it.
Not every offense is a terminable offense. Certainly, if somebody commits an act of harassment that rises to the level of termination, it's important that be reported up, that action be taken quickly to evaluate and review the issue and make a determination so that there's no stalling or delay. And so if for example, there was a report of a very serious act, taking that immediate action is going to allow the people who report it up to be comfortable and confident that the system is working. At the same time, if there's a report of misconduct that is not necessarily terminable, but is an issue that needs to be addressed and resolved, then you need to make sure, again, you're sensitive to the person who is committing the misconduct to give them the counseling and support they need to improve their behavior, and give them consequences for doing well and consequences for doing poorly with respect to that. So it's important to think about to take a look at the story that's being reported up, to get a group that evaluates it and comes to determination as to the severity and the action that the company should take in respect of it. And be mindful, again, that not every misconduct is a terminable act, and that there needs to be a company that can survive past these issues and be better on the other side.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess, just to sort of wrap it up, what sort of in a sort of summary, how would you summarize what a good organization should do to create a good tone at the top and the bottom as well?
Yeah, I think it's important that you create policies that are appropriate for your organization to protect it from bad actors, that you disseminate and implement those in ways that are effective so that you don't allow things to slip through the cracks or allow there to be gaps in the reporting, that you evaluate reports efficiently, effectively, quickly, and you come to conclusions and you act on those conclusions so that things don't delay or get pushed to the side or ignored. All of those things will lead to mistrust in the system. And then finally, when you do make these determinations, you need to be mindful that you have a company to continue to run after you resolve it. And if people are going to stay in place because the misconduct was such that it wasn't a terminable offense, if you will, you need to make sure that all sides are comfortable, that there's been a solution that works, and that the workplace is now free of harassment or the issues, and we can proceed uninterrupted on our mission for success. And again, it's important that you're able to tell not just internally in your organization, but your donors and the government and other people that are looking at you, that we're an organization that will has a culture of compliance, that we are effective and efficient with the use of the funds that are donated to us, and that we deal with any issues that might arise. You look at what's happened with U.S. gymnastics, you look at Penn State, you look at these things where reports were just ignored or not appropriately dealt with for years and years and years, and now those organizations took significant hits in their mission, and that's what you really need to avoid.
Yeah, time does not solve most problems. It only makes it worse.
To the contrary, that's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rick, for your time today and your insights about this topic. I think it's a very timely one these days because of so much, as you mentioned, a lot of organizations are going through a lot of turmoil right now. So thank you, and thank everybody for listening in.